It was a bright Tuesday morning, and the streets of the city were already buzzing with people rushing to work, school, and errands. Among the crowd, Marcus Thompson, a well-respected pharmacist, was preparing for another day at his pharmacy. He had worked at that location for over a decade, and everyone in the neighborhood knew him for his friendly smile, helpful attitude, and dedication to his patients. Marcus loved his job and often went out of his way to make sure every customer felt cared for. That morning seemed like any other, until everything changed in a matter of minutes. As Marcus was arranging the shelves and checking prescriptions, a uniformed police officer named James Carter walked into the pharmacy. At first, Marcus thought it was just a routine visit or maybe a quick question about a prescription. He had no idea that the officer was about to confront him in a way that would humiliate him in front of everyone. Officer Carter approached the counter with a stern expression, his presence immediately making the staff and customers feel uneasy. The confrontation began over what seemed like a minor issue, something that could have been resolved quietly and professionally, but instead of addressing it calmly, Officer Carter raised his voice, accusing Marcus of wrongdoing in front of a growing number of customers. People started turning their heads, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered nervously, others pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Marcus felt his heart race, a mix of anger, confusion, and embarrassment flooding through him. He tried to explain politely, offering calm words and evidence to show that he had done nothing wrong, but Officer Carter ignored him, continuing to make sharp, humiliating remarks. His tone was not just commanding, it was mocking, as if he was trying to make Marcus feel small and powerless in his own workplace. The tension in the pharmacy grew thicker by the second. Customers looked on in shock, some trying to step in, but most feeling unsure of what to do. It was an intense scene, one that no one could have predicted would end up being shared across social media and news outlets within hours. Marcus felt trapped, knowing that any misstep might escalate the situation further, yet also knowing that he deserved respect and dignity. As the confrontation continued, Marcus realized that this was no ordinary complaint or misunderstanding. This was a public display meant to shame him, and the officer showed little regard for the impact his actions would have. Not only was Marcus being humiliated, but his employees and customers were also witnessing an abuse of authority. It was a moment that highlighted the imbalance of power, and Marcus could feel the eyes of the community on him, even if only in passing glances and whispered conversations. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the officer left the pharmacy, but the damage was already done. The customers who had witnessed the incident shared their disbelief and concern. Some took videos and posted them online, while others spoke to the news, describing the scene in detail. What had been meant as a routine day at work had turned into a national story. Marcus knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would involve public attention, legal action, and a fight for justice. Even after the officer left, Marcus had to gather himself and continue serving the customers who remained. His hands trembled slightly as he filled prescriptions and answered questions, but he forced a smile, trying to maintain the professionalism he was known for. He knew that staying calm and composed was important, not just for his reputation, but for showing his community that dignity could not be taken away by intimidation or humiliation. Word about the incident spread quickly, first within the neighborhood and then across the city. Social media users shared videos and messages condemning the officer's actions. Many people were outraged, calling the incident an example of racial bias and abuse of power. News channels picked up the story, interviewing witnesses and experts, analyzing how a single moment in a pharmacy could spark such widespread attention. For Marcus, the incident was deeply personal, but it also became something bigger than himself. It highlighted the struggles many people face when confronted with authority, especially when discrimination and bias are involved. Marcus's calm response in the face of humiliation inspired others, and soon, support from the community, civil rights organizations, and even strangers began pouring in. By the end of the day, Marcus realized that his life, his pharmacy, and the city around him would never be the same. What had started as a routine morning had turned into a defining moment, a story of resilience, injustice, and the power of standing up, even in the most difficult circumstances. This was just the beginning of a journey that would reveal how one act of public humiliation could cost a city millions and leave a lasting mark on a community. The moment the officer walked out of the pharmacy, Marcus Thompson thought the worst was over. but little did he know, the story was only beginning. As he tried to calm himself and reassure his employees, someone from the crowd had already pulled out a phone and started recording the entire incident. Within minutes, that video, capturing every humiliating word and gesture, began circulating on social media. The clip was raw, unedited, and powerful, showing Marcus standing firm while the officer publicly berated him. People across the city could see exactly what had happened, and the outrage was immediate. By midday, the video had been shared thousands of times, and comments were pouring in from people all over the country. Many viewers expressed shock and anger, calling the officer's actions unacceptable and demanding accountability. Some commenters shared their own experiences of discrimination or unfair treatment, creating a sense of solidarity with Marcus. Others debated the responsibilities of law enforcement and the impact of public humiliation, sparking long threads of discussion on justice, power, and equality. News outlets quickly picked up the story, using clips from the video to illustrate the shocking incident. Local reporters visited the pharmacy, speaking with employees and customers who had witnessed the scene firsthand. Each account confirmed what the video had shown, highlighting Marcus's professionalism, patience, and composure under extreme pressure. Meanwhile, national media began analyzing the broader implications, examining patterns of racial bias, public misconduct, and the growing power of citizen-recorded footage in holding authorities accountable. As the video spread, social media influencers and advocacy groups began sharing it widely, tagging local officials, police departments, and civil rights organizations. The story became a trending topic on platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #PoliceAccountability. People from all walks of life joined the conversation, expressing their support and calling for immediate action against the officer. Marcus, who had never imagined being at the center of a viral story, watched as his life changed almost overnight. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out with messages of encouragement, telling him how proud they were of the way he had handled the situation. At the same time, the attention brought stress, fear, and uncertainty. He knew that while support was overwhelming, the viral nature of the video meant that his every move would now be scrutinized. Legal experts weighed in, explaining how the video could serve as powerful evidence in a lawsuit, highlighting the officer's misconduct and the city's potential liability. Analysts also discussed the financial impact of viral incidents like this, noting how public outcry could lead to costly settlements or policy changes. Suddenly, what had been a personal humiliation became a public matter with far-reaching consequences. Interestingly, the viral video didn't just focus on the confrontation. It highlighted Marcus's calm and respectful demeanor, which contrasted sharply with the officer's aggressive behavior. Viewers praised Marcus for keeping his composure, noting that his response was a model of dignity under pressure. Some even speculated that his calm approach had intensified public outrage against the officer, making the incident impossible to ignore. The story quickly drew attention from local politicians and community leaders, who began issuing statements demanding accountability. City council meetings were filled with concerned citizens referencing the video, calling for transparency and justice. Even law enforcement officials admitted that the footage highlighted serious procedural failures, sparking an internal investigation that would later reveal troubling patterns. By the end of the first week, Marcus's video had been seen by millions, and it had sparked a nationwide conversation. From ordinary citizens to legal experts and activists, everyone seemed to be weighing in. The viral footage had transformed a single, humiliating moment into a movement, showing the power of social media, community support, and public scrutiny in demanding accountability. For Marcus, the viral attention was overwhelming, but it also provided hope. He realized that while one officer's actions had tried to diminish him, the response from the public showed that dignity, professionalism, and truth could not be erased. The video had captured more than humiliation. It had captured resilience, courage, and the beginning of a fight for justice that would change his life and the city forever. As the video of Marcus Thompson's confrontation with Officer James Carter continued to spread, the city began to react in ways that no one could have anticipated. People everywhere were talking about it, sharing their own experiences, and demanding answers. The moment that had started inside a small pharmacy had now grown into a movement, a spark that ignited discussions about respect, accountability, and racial justice across neighborhoods, social media, and news outlets. Within hours, Marcus began receiving messages from friends, neighbors, and even strangers who wanted to show their support. Local community groups organized quickly, gathering outside the pharmacy with signs, chants, and cameras. They wanted to make sure that Marcus knew he was not alone, and that the city could not ignore the incident. People held candles, gave speeches, and shared heartfelt stories about similar experiences, creating an atmosphere of solidarity and empathy. The reaction was not limited to organized groups. Ordinary citizens joined in spontaneously, many holding up their phones to capture the scene, some recording messages of encouragement for Marcus, others left flowers or notes of support at the pharmacy's entrance, expressing their outrage and demanding that the officer face consequences for his actions. The city, which had been quiet just a few days earlier, now buzzed with conversations about justice, fairness, and the power of public accountability. Local leaders quickly weighed in, including city council members, religious leaders, and civil rights activists. They held press conferences, released statements, and called for immediate investigations. No one should ever be humiliated in their workplace, especially in front of their community, one leader said, echoing the thoughts of many. These voices amplified the outrage and made it clear that the incident had struck a nerve far beyond the pharmacy walls. The social media response fueled the movement even more, with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus, #PoliceAccountability, and #StandWithMarcus trending. People across the country joined the conversation, commenting, sharing videos, and creating memes that highlighted both the officer's misconduct and Marcus's courage. The power of digital activism became evident as millions of views poured in, making it impossible for city officials to ignore the public outcry. Community members also began organizing meetings and forums to discuss the incident, inviting lawyers, police reform experts, and activists to share insights. These gatherings became spaces for people to voice their frustrations, ask questions, and brainstorm solutions. Marcus, though overwhelmed by the attention, attended a few of these meetings, speaking briefly but powerfully about his experience. His words resonated deeply, inspiring others to continue demanding justice. Interestingly, the reaction was not entirely one-sided, as some voices attempted to defend the officer or downplay the incident, yet the overwhelming support for Marcus and the widespread outrage made it clear that the public sentiment favored accountability and fairness. People realized that the incident was not just about one individual but about a larger pattern of power imbalance, racial bias, and the need for systemic change. By the end of the first week following the viral video, the community's response had transformed into a movement that could not be ignored. Protests were peaceful but persistent, social media campaigns were relentless, and petitions demanding justice gained tens of thousands of signatures. Even local businesses joined in, showing solidarity by posting messages of support and providing resources for community events. Through it all, Marcus remained at the center, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience and dignity. His calm, composed response to humiliation had inspired a city and caught the attention of the nation. The community's reaction highlighted a simple truth: when people come together to support justice, their voices cannot be silenced, and accountability becomes not just a demand, but a reality waiting to happen. In those early days, Marcus realized that the incident was no longer just about him. It had grown into something larger, a story about the power of community, the strength of unity, and the undeniable importance of standing up against injustice. The reaction of the city and its residents set the stage for the next phase of the story, one that would bring legal battles, policy discussions, and financial consequences, proving that even a single act of public humiliation could ripple far beyond its immediate moment. The outrage from the viral video and the community's reaction soon reached a point where silence was no longer an option. Marcus Thompson knew that talking and sharing his experience was important, but words alone could not hold the officer accountable. The humiliation he had suffered in front of his customers, colleagues, and the wider community demanded more than apologies. It demanded justice. With the encouragement of friends, family, and local activists, Marcus made the difficult decision to pursue legal action, a step that would mark the beginning of a long and challenging journey. Marcus contacted a team of civil rights lawyers known for taking cases involving police misconduct. They listened carefully to his story, reviewed the video footage, and confirmed that there was a strong case against Officer James Carter and the city. "This isn't just about you," Marcus, one lawyer explained, it's about sending a message that public humiliation and abuse of power will not be tolerated, and holding those responsible accountable. That meeting planted the seeds of a legal battle that would eventually capture national attention. The filing of the lawsuit was a tense and emotional moment for Marcus. He had never imagined that a routine day at work would lead to courtroom proceedings, financial settlements, and intense media scrutiny, yet he knew that stepping forward was necessary, not just for himself, but for others who might face similar mistreatment. His lawyers explained the process, the possible outcomes, and the evidence needed to make a strong case, and Marcus committed to seeing it through. As the case became public knowledge, media coverage intensified. Legal experts analyzed the lawsuit, discussing how public humiliation could result in significant financial liability for cities, especially when it involved racial bias or misconduct by law enforcement officers. Commentators noted that Marcus's calm and professional demeanor in the viral video would strengthen his case, contrasting sharply with Officer Carter's aggressive behavior. Every detail from the video, witness statements, and even internal police communications could potentially contribute to the legal outcome. The city, realizing the seriousness of the situation, began consulting its legal team, attempting to assess the potential fallout. Officials were suddenly aware that the viral incident was no longer just a local embarrassment but a financial and reputational risk. The public attention made it clear that ignoring the lawsuit could lead to severe consequences, and negotiations with Marcus's legal team began even before the first hearing. Meanwhile, the community continued to show support, attending court updates, sharing information online, and urging city leaders to act responsibly. Activists highlighted the case as part of a larger pattern of misconduct and racial bias in law enforcement, framing Marcus's lawsuit not only as a personal fight for justice but also as a symbol of accountability for systemic issues. Social media campaigns continued to draw attention, putting pressure on officials to take the matter seriously. Throughout the legal preparations, Marcus experienced a mix of anxiety and determination. The thought of facing months of court appearances, depositions, and legal arguments was daunting, but he remained focused on the goal, justice and accountability. His lawyers prepared meticulously, gathering statements from witnesses, compiling evidence, and creating a timeline of events that clearly demonstrated the officer's misconduct. Every step of the process reinforced the importance of truth and fairness. By the time the lawsuit officially began, the city and its officials knew they were facing a highly publicized case with national attention. Marcus had transformed from a victim of public humiliation into a determined advocate for justice. His story was no longer just about a single pharmacy incident. It was about challenging authority, demanding accountability, and ensuring that power was not used to intimidate or demean. The legal action became a defining moment in his life, one that would set a precedent for others and show the strength of courage and resilience. In these early days of the legal battle, Marcus learned that justice was rarely immediate, but persistence, evidence, and public support could tip the scales. The lawsuit was not just a fight against an individual officer, but a challenge to a system that sometimes allowed misconduct to go unchecked. Every filing, every argument, and every witness testimony brought the city closer to understanding the impact of its actions. And the lesson was clear: no one could humiliate another in public and escape responsibility. The moment the lawsuit was filed, the city could no longer treat the incident as a minor complaint or try to sweep it under the rug. Public pressure had grown too intense, and the viral video continued to dominate headlines and social media feeds. The combination of Marcus Thompson's legal action and the community's relentless outrage forced city officials and the police department to take serious action, launching an official investigation into Officer James Carter's conduct. The internal investigation began quietly, with officials reviewing reports, interviewing witnesses, and examining security footage, but as details emerged, it became clear that the officer's behavior went beyond a single incident. Patterns of misconduct, minor complaints that had previously been ignored, and questionable use of authority started surfacing. What had initially seemed like a routine confrontation was now part of a bigger story about accountability, ethics, and trust within the police force. At the same time, backlash from the public intensified. People across the city voiced their outrage through protests, social media campaigns, and community meetings. The hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #PoliceAccountability were trending nationally, and calls for transparency grew louder each day. Residents demanded answers. How could an officer publicly humiliate a citizen without facing immediate consequences, and what steps would the city take to prevent similar incidents in the future? Journalists dug into past reports and discovered instances where complaints against Officer Carter had been overlooked or dismissed. Each new revelation added fuel to the fire, and the city found itself on the defensive. Officials held press conferences attempting to calm the situation, but their words often fell flat, overshadowed by the raw footage of Marcus standing tall while being demeaned in front of customers. The city was beginning to realize that public opinion could not be managed with vague statements or empty apologies. Meanwhile, Marcus watched the investigation unfold with mixed emotions, relief that action was finally being taken, but frustration that it took public outrage and a viral video to trigger accountability. He continued to receive support from the community, civil rights organizations, and even strangers from across the nation, who shared their admiration for his resilience and his courage to stand up for what was right. The backlash also sparked debates within the police department. Some officers expressed embarrassment and concern over the misconduct, while others defended their colleague, claiming the situation had been misinterpreted. These internal conflicts highlighted the challenges of changing culture within law enforcement, and the investigation became a turning point not just for Marcus, but for the department itself, forcing officials to confront uncomfortable truths about training, oversight, and authority. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation uncovered key evidence, witness statements confirming the officer's aggressive tone, inconsistencies in the official report, and emails suggesting prior complaints had been mishandled. Each discovery strengthened Marcus's case, and the city began to understand the potential financial and reputational risks. The backlash, once seen as mere public opinion, now carried tangible consequences, with city leaders realizing that accountability was not just moral but essential. Community meetings continued to grow, with residents demanding that the officer be held accountable and that systemic changes be implemented. Activists called for reforms in police training, better oversight, and policies to prevent abuse of authority. The investigation had evolved beyond a single individual. It had become a reflection of the city's values and priorities, showing how one incident could expose deeper issues within institutions. By the end of this phase, the investigation and public backlash had transformed the narrative entirely. What began as an act of humiliation had sparked a citywide reckoning, drawing attention to patterns of misconduct, public accountability, and the power of citizens to demand justice. Marcus's personal ordeal had become a catalyst for change, forcing the city to confront uncomfortable truths and take steps toward meaningful reform. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast, recognizing that while the investigation and backlash brought tension, they also brought hope that accountability would prevail, that policies would change, and that future citizens would be treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. The stage was now set for the next chapter of the story, one that would involve settlements, negotiations, and the financial consequences that would ultimately cost the city millions. After weeks of investigation, public outcry, and legal maneuvering, the city realized that the situation with Marcus Thompson was no longer just a scandal. It had become a full-blown crisis. The viral video, the community protests, and the growing media attention had put immense pressure on city officials, and they now knew that allowing the lawsuit to drag on could result in even greater financial and reputational damage. Settlement negotiations became the next critical step, and both sides prepared for intense discussions that would determine the outcome. Marcus, guided by his legal team, approached the negotiations with a clear goal: justice, accountability, and recognition of the harm he had suffered. While the lawsuit sought damages, Marcus was also focused on ensuring that the city and police department implemented changes to prevent future incidents. His lawyers presented detailed evidence, including witness statements, video footage, and records of prior complaints against Officer James Carter. The case was not only strong but also supported by overwhelming public opinion. The city, on the other hand, was navigating a delicate balance, trying to limit financial liability while managing public perception. Officials were well aware that any misstep could make the backlash worse. They consulted legal experts, public relations advisors, and city leaders to craft a strategy that would resolve the matter while addressing public demands for accountability. The negotiations were tense, with both sides understanding the high stakes involved. Community members and activists closely followed every development, attending meetings and monitoring announcements. They wanted to ensure that the settlement reflected both justice for Marcus and meaningful reform. The pressure from citizens was relentless, reminding city officials that this was not just about money, it was about responsibility, transparency, and public trust. The story had grown beyond the pharmacy, the officer, and Marcus. It had become a symbol of accountability in action. During the negotiations, Marcus remained calm but firm, insisting on terms that recognized the emotional, professional, and social impact of the incident. He wanted compensation that was fair but also wanted public acknowledgement that what happened was unacceptable. His legal team argued that the city had a responsibility not only to Marcus but to the community as a whole, emphasizing that inaction or minimal response would damage public confidence permanently. After days of discussions, counteroffers, and strategic planning, the city finally agreed to a settlement. The agreement included a multi-million-dollar payout to Marcus, covering emotional distress, lost opportunities, and public humiliation, but more importantly, it also included a series of reforms within the police department. Policies were revised. Officers underwent additional training in public interaction and bias awareness, and systems for handling complaints were strengthened to prevent misconduct in the future. For Marcus, the settlement was both a personal victory and a public triumph. It validated his experience, held those responsible accountable, and created real change in the city. While money could never erase the humiliation he endured, the reforms ensured that future citizens would not face the same treatment. The community celebrated the outcome, seeing it as a victory for justice, dignity, and the power of standing up against wrongdoing. The settlement also sent a clear message nationwide: abuse of power and public humiliation have consequences. Cities and institutions were reminded that accountability is not optional and that the public and legal systems would act when injustice occurs. Marcus's story became a reference point for similar cases, demonstrating how courage, evidence, and community support could lead to meaningful outcomes. By the end of the settlement negotiations, Marcus had not only secured justice for himself but had also helped spark a larger conversation about authority, responsibility, and reform. The incident that had begun in a quiet pharmacy had now changed city policies, inspired community activism, and reminded everyone that standing up for what is right can create lasting, tangible change. It was a victory that went far beyond financial compensation. It was a triumph of justice, awareness, and accountability. The settlement in Marcus Thompson's case did more than just provide him with financial compensation. It sent ripples across the city, the state, and even the nation. What had started as a single, humiliating encounter in a small pharmacy had become a powerful story of accountability, justice, and systemic change. People everywhere were talking about the implications, and the conversation went far beyond Marcus himself. Immediately, legal experts began analyzing the case, noting that it was a prime example of how public humiliation by authority figures could carry serious consequences. Lawyers and scholars discussed the potential for similar lawsuits, emphasizing that the combination of video evidence, community outrage, and clear misconduct created a strong precedent. The story became a case study in law schools, business ethics courses, and public administration seminars, illustrating how one act could affect an entire city financially and socially. Community leaders and activists also reflected on the wider implications, using the case to highlight systemic issues in policing, public accountability, and racial bias. Workshops, webinars, and panel discussions sprang up, analyzing how policies and practices could be improved. Advocates stressed that Marcus's courage had inspired a citywide examination of power dynamics, reminding institutions that authority comes with responsibility, and that ignoring misconduct could have lasting consequences. Corporations, local businesses, and public institutions began paying closer attention to how their employees and representatives interacted with the public. The case showed that reputational damage and financial liability were not abstract risks, they were very real, and even a single incident could result in millions of dollars lost. More importantly, it demonstrated that public opinion, amplified by social media, could influence outcomes in ways that were unprecedented just a decade ago. On a societal level, Marcus's story became symbolic. representing the power of standing up against injustice. The incident sparked discussions about dignity, fairness, and the importance of documenting misconduct, inspiring people in different professions and communities to hold authority figures accountable. Educators, policymakers, and activists pointed to the case as a turning point, emphasizing that transparency, evidence, and public engagement are essential tools in maintaining ethical behavior. The police department, in particular, faced significant scrutiny, prompting not only internal reforms but also national conversations about training, bias awareness, and complaint management. Officers across the country were encouraged to consider how their actions could be perceived publicly, and city leaders began implementing policies to prevent future incidents of misconduct. Marcus's case had effectively raised the bar for accountability in public service. Even ordinary citizens felt the impact of the story, realizing that their voices, videos, and advocacy could make a difference. Social media became a tool not just for sharing outrage, but for creating change. People began documenting incidents of misconduct, starting petitions, and demanding reforms. Inspired by the precedent Marcus had set, his courage demonstrated that one person, when supported by truth and community, could influence an entire system. In the months following the settlement, the city reported measurable changes, including new officer training programs, more transparent reporting procedures, and a renewed focus on public trust. The conversation extended beyond law enforcement, reaching schools, businesses, and municipal offices, highlighting the importance of respect, accountability, and ethical behavior in all areas of public life. Marcus, while personally relieved by the outcome, recognized that the wider implications were even more significant. His experience had helped shift public perception, inspire systemic reforms, and encourage dialogue about justice and dignity. What had once been a painful, humiliating moment had transformed into a powerful example of how courage, community support, and accountability could create meaningful change. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that the incident had far-reaching consequences, demonstrating that a single moment of misconduct could become a catalyst for education, reform, and public awareness. Marcus's story had transcended his own life, touching the lives of countless people, and leaving a legacy that reminded everyone that standing up for what is right can ripple far beyond the initial moment. By the time the dust began to settle, Marcus Thompson's experience had become more than just a story of personal struggle. It had transformed into a powerful lesson for the city, its citizens, and even the nation. What started as a moment of public humiliation had blossomed into a movement of awareness, accountability, and change, demonstrating the extraordinary impact that one individual's courage can have on an entire community. Marcus reflected on the long journey, from the initial confrontation with Officer James Carter to the viral video, the lawsuit, the investigation, the settlement, and the broader implications. He realized that his personal pain had a purpose far beyond himself, showing that dignity and professionalism could endure even in the face of public shame. Every step of the way, he learned that standing up for what is right is rarely easy, but it is always necessary. The city, for its part, had learned difficult but valuable lessons about accountability and transparency. Officials recognized that authority without oversight could quickly lead to costly mistakes, both financially and reputationally. The reforms implemented after the settlement, better training for officers, stricter complaint procedures, and greater emphasis on public interaction, were more than policy changes. They were a reflection of a city willing to learn and grow. The case underscored that institutional trust is fragile, and maintaining it requires constant vigilance and responsibility. Community members also learned the power of collective action. Witnessing the city respond to public outrage, guided by truth and evidence, reminded citizens that their voices matter, that advocacy, protest, and support can create tangible change. Schools, neighborhood associations, and civic organizations began hosting discussions about ethics, respect, and accountability, inspired by Marcus's story. These conversations helped shift local culture, promoting awareness of bias, power dynamics, and the importance of standing up for justice. The legal community viewed the case as a landmark example of how evidence, public support, and ethical advocacy could intersect to achieve meaningful outcomes. Lawyers discussed how video footage, eyewitness testimony, and thorough preparation could transform what might have seemed like an ordinary incident into a case with national significance. Marcus's calm, composed response became a teaching point for legal and ethical studies, illustrating that professionalism and dignity are powerful Tools in the pursuit of justice. Even Marcus himself discovered lessons that went beyond law or policy. He realized that resilience is built through patience, courage, and determination. Facing humiliation in public could have broken his spirit, but instead, he used the experience as a catalyst for personal growth and a platform to influence change. He understood that the most difficult challenges often carry the greatest opportunities for leadership, empowerment, and societal impact. The incident also highlighted the role of technology and social media in shaping modern accountability. Marcus's viral video demonstrated that ordinary citizens could document injustice, mobilize public opinion, and drive systemic reform. People learned that transparency is no longer optional in the digital age, and that ethical behavior must withstand not only immediate scrutiny but also the lens of public observation. This lesson has implications far beyond law enforcement, extending to businesses, governments, and communities worldwide. By the time the city finalized reforms, implemented policies, and ensured oversight mechanisms were in place, it was clear that Marcus's experience had left an enduring mark. The settlement was significant, but the broader impact, cultural change, public awareness, and strengthened accountability, was even more valuable. Citizens recognized that justice is more than a monetary award. It is about correcting wrongs, creating safeguards, and fostering trust. Ultimately, the story of Marcus Thompson became a beacon of hope and a guide for others facing injustice, demonstrating that courage, community support, and persistence can turn a moment of shame into a lasting legacy. The lessons learned extended to everyone. Individuals must stand up for what is right, institutions must act responsibly, and society must hold itself accountable for fairness and respect. As Marcus looked back, he understood that the incident, painful as it was, had shaped him, his city, and the broader conversation about dignity, justice, and equality. What unfolded from a single, humiliating encounter became a story of empowerment, awareness, and change, reminding the world that when courage meets accountability, even the most challenging circumstances can create profound and lasting impact.